It probably makes sense
Sorry.
if we do a sort of just quick go around and introduce ourselves and where we're from today as well. So the speakers for today's session, I have Doniya Soni-Clark, who is the Policy and Public Affairs Lead at Multiverse, Dr. Benjamin Silverston, the Associate Professor at WMG at the University of Warwick, and Chris Pook, Government Policy Director at Nuclear AMRC. So I am going to kick us off by asking Doniya to speak first, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I said about a round of introductions first.
Yeah.
If we could just go around this way.
Okay, I'm Sue Garden. I speak for the Liberal Democrats and the Lords on education, and particularly post-16.
Alistair Amadale, crossbench member of the House of Lords.
I'm Oliver Freeman. I'm from the Office of Senior MP, the Shadow Business and Consumers Minister.
James Harris from the Connect Group and the Secretariat.
Tabitha Trail from Connect Group as well. Doniya, I just introduced kindly.
That's Chris Pook, Nuclear AMRC.
Brent Hampton, Builders Merchants Federation.
Katie Pell's Institute for the Motor Industry. Casey Smith from the industry.
Secretary for BA Systems.
Eric Clark, Chair of MTC Training.
Russ Director of Policy, Challenge Management Accountants. Johnny to award from JC Park Debt Creators. Ben Silverstone, University of Warwick. Sachin from the Food and Drink Federation. Alex Spencer from London South Bank University. John McKenna from the University of Scotland.
Poppy Powell from Babcock. Amy Moore from the Government Group.
Fred Carter from RSL Awards.
Perfect. We've got a really wide range of people in the room, really wide range of sectors covered, which is excellent to see. So if I could ask Doniya to kick us off and we'll start the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I was subbed in, so I think you might have been expecting Sophie Ruddock, but unfortunately she wasn't able to join. So I'm Doniya, I'm the Policy and Public Affairs Lead at Multiverse. I'll start off really quickly with just describing what Multiverse is and what we do. And then I was asked to speak a little bit about Multiverse's approach, why it's different, and some of the wider questions around the future of work, reskilling, and the upskilling challenge that we're facing. So just to kick off, Multiverse is an ed tech company on a mission to create a diverse group of future leaders by building an outstanding alternative to university and corporate training through tech apprenticeships. We provide apprenticeships to young adults and those looking to reskill or upskill through 12 to 15-month programs focused on in-demand skills such as software engineering, data analytics, project management, etc. We currently work with over 1,000 businesses and have 10,000 apprentices either on program or in our alumni. So we've expanded quite a lot recently. Our approach and what we think makes us different is the fact that we are built on 3 principles. Principle 1 is equitable access. So it's a tuition-free program, as all apprenticeships are, but it means that pre-existing wealth is no barrier. We assess people on the basis of core competencies rather than their previous academic qualifications, which we believe correlate better with job performance. And actually, we find that has allowed us to be have individuals from multiple different walks of life on our apprenticeship programs, especially from our career starters, so the young people starting with our apprenticeships. Our second approach is all around applied learning. So we believe that learning is based on a robust curriculum tested through immediate application in the workplace. So it shouldn't just be a case of 20% off the job in an exam room or in a classroom, but actually that off the job time is incorporated into every element of your working life. And you should find ways to apply learning in all aspects of your role. And lastly, the big thing that makes us different is the fact that we're enabled by a community. So building a network and community is one of the most important benefits of Multiverse apprenticeships. And actually, when we were starting off Multiverse about 6 years ago, one of the things that our founder kept hearing is that university is a good place to meet people and build contacts and build a community. So what we set out to do is establish an apprenticeship community, which, as I said, has more than 10,000 apprentices who all work together and have subgroups, alumni networks, speakers, etc. So the positive results from our approach is that we have thousands of applications each year, 1 application every 11 minutes to become a Multiverse apprentice. We have over 10,000 apprentices, as I mentioned. 69% of apprentices on our program have increased job responsibilities following their apprenticeship. 93% of our apprentices stay with their employer post-apprenticeship, and 97% of our apprentices engage with our community. And we did a bit of analysis on the impact of our apprentices, and our apprentices report a 50% decrease in time spent unproductively, a big productivity. So what does all of this mean when we're thinking about the future of work, operating in a future tech-centric economy with things like ChatGPT and AI coming up and becoming a big focus? And what we find is that work is changing faster than even anyone can predict, with 85% of jobs in 2030 not having been invented yet. We know that making predictions is hard, and we sympathize that making predictions is hard for the government and for businesses, for anyone. But what we think is really important is that the existing education system focuses on 3 years of training upfront and then going forth into the workplace. We believe that training should be throughout your entire career and shots of learning when is relevant to you and when is appropriate for you and your career. We also think that training should be flexible to employers in the sense that the labor market will go up and down. So being able for employers to have opportunities to find ways to upskill their workers in an agile way, in a way that matters to their business and to their employees, is really important. And finally, it has to be inclusive. We can't allow situations where the best jobs of the next 20 years go to those people that got the best jobs in the last 20 years. So we need to find ways to get more people from more diverse walks of life into apprenticeships and into the workplace. We know that there's outcomes gaps based on gender, ethnicity, parental wealth, whether or not you run free school meals. And actually, that's one thing that we think apprenticeships can really help even out the discrepancies there. So yeah, I'm aware that we only have 5 minutes, so I just rattled through that. I'm very happy to take any questions on Multiverse, our approach, and sort of what makes it different and why we think apprenticeships are the way forward when we think about reskilling and upskilling for the future.
Thank you very much. I think we'll do the speaker contributions first, and then we'll have a sort of Q&A at the end. But just before I introduce the next person, we've had 2 MPs join us. If you'd just like to introduce yourselves.
James Davis, MP for Pubic.
Dr. Baker, MP for Norfolk.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Benjamin Silverston, who's the Associate Professor of WMD at the University of Warwick.
Thank you very much. So, I came to this meeting a couple of years ago to talk about the exciting work we're doing around the electrification skills agenda and how excited we were to be engaging with lots of trailblazers and the difference we were hoping to make in that space. So I'd like to kind of weave a little story of where we've been in the past couple of years and some of the challenges and successes that we've had. So the issues around kind of future skills, particularly manufacturing, electrification, and those sorts of areas. We were looking to apprenticeships to be a vehicle to help young people through from to take part in important roles in those sorts of sectors. And what we wanted to do is to adjust existing apprenticeships. That kind of made a hell of a lot of sense. We've got most sectors covered. Let's adjust some existing apprenticeships. So 2.5 years later, I can report, having been a member of the Auto Trailblazer for 2.5 years, we still don't have a new apprenticeship. That apprenticeship still not slated for development. Similarly, the 4 new undergraduate engineering standards we're so excited about are still not on the books yet. And the problem we've got there is that we talk about declining apprenticeship staff. These apprenticeships now becoming increasingly relevant to employers. And what the providers we're working with are increasingly doing is having a hell of a lot of unfunded provision in order to deliver the things that those employers need. So we've seen that with our regional FE colleges who are trying to have automotive apprenticeships, and then they're bolting on EVs for side through the likes of high qualifications, which are unfunded as part of the apprenticeship, and therefore causing significant issues. So as part of this journey, I've approached this to deal with the battery manufacturing issue. We've been trying to adjust an existing standard to meet that. So we actually formed Trailblazer. And I have to say, actually, in all of these activities, I don't think iFate is actually the blocker. The process is not the blocker, it's employer engagement. It's the speed with which we can turn things around that is increasingly important. So we established the Battery Trailblazer, and what we've done for the very first time is we've created a standard for an industry that we want to exist, rather than what we do in this country, which is wait until we have a demand for something and then try to plug that gap as quickly as we can, and that takes a lot of time to do. So that particular standard is now, working its way through. We're actually at the point where it's going to a funding ban, and therefore we'll be in a position that once investors start to look at the UK, they will be able to see that we have a skills environment which, if they were to invest, they're able to then get the skill staff that they need. No, we're not training thousands of factory technicians right now because there's no point. However, as soon as that demand is there, this standard exists, we can move forward from that. So we've had some challenges, I say, in terms of what can happen with the existing standards. We've had huge successes in establishing this trailblazer and taking it through to where it is. But it's also thrown up some systemic problems that we've got as well. So the first one, we are running a strategy with all of the colleges in the West Midlands, and the biggest issue that they've got is they need the skilled staff to deliver these kinds of apprenticeships that are coming over the hill. And while we're throwing money and effort at the skills that industry needs, we're forgetting that education needs them first so that they can be carried forwards. So we're working with those FE colleges at the moment to look at how as a university we can support the training and development of their staff. Again, so that the skills environment can exist for investment to be realistic. The other area as well, and I think we as a collective group need to transmit this back into the likes of DFE, is that school level education is not conducive to bringing people into high technology manufacturing businesses in the future. So to give you an example, I was sitting with my partner the other night, she's a science teacher, and she was preparing what I consider to be a disturbing juxtaposition of lessons. So she was preparing the one year 9 lesson in the entire secondary school curriculum that deals with alternative energy. So she was talking about batteries and hydrogen. There's one lesson in the whole curriculum. And then she was dealing with her GCSE revision, and she was telling her students that wind power is not reliable, turbines are noisy and ugly, and solar power only works when the sun shines. So we have these systemic problems we need to deal with. We need to deal with the staffing base in education to enable these high technology apprenticeships to really work. You need to look at the school level education and ask ourselves why we're teaching 16-year-olds to crack through it all, examining on it, but yet we don't ask them about anything else to do with their future focus. Some of these we've got solutions for, some of them are bigger, systemic, existential problems that we have as a country. But these are the things that we're grappling with now. We made huge strides forward, but now we need to look at how we invest in provisions, we need to look at how we invest in the education that comes before apprenticeships, so we're able to bring people through that are willing and ready to take up those opportunities.
Thank you very much. And very interesting what you said about batteries. It was in Sweden recently, visiting Norfolk there, and the progress that they've made in a number of areas, both in terms of clean steel and battery technology and so on, is very long way on from where we are as a country at the moment, and obviously getting that sort of skill set base right, getting the apprenticeships and things in place is going to be necessary to be able to deliver that. The next speaker that I'm going to introduce is Chris Pook, the Government Policy Director at the Nuclear AMRC, which I'm very excited about, as my constituency has the second highest concentration of people in the nuclear sector anywhere in the country. And we've seen a lot of apprenticeships locally, including Sellafield and others, and recently visited Bridgewater, where they've got a big apprenticeship programme in order to deliver nuclear buoyancy. So very interested to hear what you've got to say, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I can do justice. So a few words about the Nuclear AMRC, just to provide a bit of context. We're part of the University of Sheffield. We're also part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, of which we're one of 7 centres, including the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, NTC, and WMG, and so on, other organisations as well. And I think that gives us quite a strength there in terms of to look across the landscape and help to connect some of the issues between government, providers, employers, industry, and so on. And I think that's quite an important part. What I'm going to say, I hope will resonate with the points made both by Multiverse and by Ben from WMG as well, actually. So I think, first of all, let me just kick off with a little case study of my own. About a year or so ago, we're approached by Rolls-Royce Submarines Limited and asked if we help them with their skills. Challenges around Derby. We were able to bring together University of Derby, Rolls-Royce, Derby City Council, local providers and so on, and essentially establish the Nuclear Skills Academy in Derby. When it opened its doors last September, they had 1,200 applications for about 200 places. And I think that's a really interesting point, because the demand for places is there, but crucially, I think, it's not necessarily growing the whole cake. So what we saw actually was a sort of a reduction in applications going into some other apprenticeship schemes in aerospace, for example. And I think that's a really important point there about the importance of increasing the supply overall. Our sisters, our neighbours, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, established several years ago, 10 years ago or so, a training centre, which again, they played a role in bringing together RGF, ERDF funding, University of Sheffield, ESFA and industry to establish an engineering apprenticeship centre. And they have recently offered up a nuclear engineering apprenticeship, which is doing well. And I think, again, the message there is they were able to play the role of connector, aggregator, interpreter, and really importantly, thinking about the future skills that industry needs as well, rather than just what's available here and now. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of interest in the nuclear sector is because the big drive for net zero, the role that nuclear plays in that, I think that has been transformational for the sector. We see a lot of interest, a lot of activity, but I think it's also reflecting part of the increased emphasis on security and resilience and also defence sector needs as well. So I think when you're looking at nuclear careers, and the confidence of business and the confidence of young people to go into this sector for careers, I think you have to look across the whole sector. And I think it's really important that the solutions that are being provided don't just rest on one particular part of the industry. So it is not just all about small modular reactors, or it's not just all about submarine propulsion. There are opportunities in decommissioning and fusion as well. So I think helping to distill the key skills that are required in nuclear as a whole provides people with much greater career certainty and options. But it's also a more difficult job to do. And I think one of the real points to note is, how do you find a way to bring together the needs of a sector that's as diverse as nuclear, help employers understand what are the future skills that are needed, and then help them work with the training providers and others to identify the sorts of courses, the sorts of qualifications that will be needed. So coordination, integration, really important. Finding a mechanism that enables employers to have that discussion is really important. And finally, I suppose, looking at how you can build an industrial cluster that is reliant not just on the big anchor companies, the Rolls-Royces, the big names of this world to attract people in, but how you can bring in SMEs and smaller companies down the supply chain. And I think that then gets you into those questions of administrative flexibility, the support that's available for SMEs to help them manage apprentices, the complexity of the system. How do companies work across different devolved administrations, different regimes in Wales, Scotland, the UK, England? And then how do you create sufficient momentum in a particular location, in a particular place? Because ultimately, a lot of technical careers are focused around particular locations. So I think I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more that I could say from the conversations I've had with people over the last few months in this space. Let me just stop there and pick up any further points in discussion.
Thank you very much. So we're going to kick off with a bit of a Q&A, and I'm going to be very cheeky as chair and ask the first question so that we can all get into it. The question that I would like to ask is, what role you think trade unions have to play in making a more open and equitable access to apprenticeships, because I think it's something that all of you have touched upon in terms of the demographics of people going into them, the support that they need to get through the process and so on, and that kind of social aspect that Doniya referred to as well. I'd also be interested in your thoughts on whether the minimum wage for apprentices being at the low rate that it is during a cost of living crisis is potentially going to be putting off people from lower income backgrounds into pursuing an apprenticeship as part of their career. Anyone who would like to open up there?
I'm happy to kick off, from the apprenticeship training provider perspective. Firstly, we agree that the minimum wage is really way too low for apprenticeships. All multiverse apprentices have a minimum £21,000 a year to even go on the platform. So we encourage all of our employers to pay the London living wage in London, and then the minimum wage for non-apprentices outside of London. So we completely agree, and it's something that we've fed back many times. We are also aware that because we deal specifically in tech apprenticeships, the wages in tech apprenticeships are going to be higher than in some other sectors, but we're very confident that we can get our employers to get to the certain levels that we need them to get to before we come to apprenticeships. So I think there's a role to play for apprenticeship providers as well, to encourage the businesses that they work for to pay higher wages for the apprentices. In terms of trade unions, I think that there's elements of the apprenticeship levy which cause unnecessary barriers for people trying to start apprenticeships, and I think that trade unions can have a greater voice in that. So an example of this is the requirement to have functional skills to complete an apprenticeship. So you must have evidence of level 2 English and maths before you can complete an apprenticeship, which we agree that literacy and numeracy is incredibly important. However, it creates an additional barrier for those school leavers who were maybe not able to achieve English and maths when they finish school, and then they would like to go to an apprenticeship, and then they find out that they have to do an apprenticeship, their first job, and English and maths all at the same time in order for them to complete an apprenticeship. So I think that there should be some, I think trade unions can work with their members and in the companies that they work with to understand what are some of these types of barriers to starting or completing an apprenticeship that they could throw their weight behind or lend their voice to, so that there is the awareness of some of the other things that are stopping people from progressing in an apprenticeship.
Thank you. Yes.
I think that unions have got a really important role they can play. Working particularly with their smaller and medium-sized members, we help support them with actively take on apprentices. Bringing that to the fore, I think, is really important. I think that the smaller businesses need a big friend in this space.
I'm not sure that's what I think.
Credit unions can play that role. And just to pick up on what Doniya said there about the level. Well, there are a number of us around the table here that can't find their GCSE certificates, are too old to be on their LRS. And despite having a PhD, I won't do their apprenticeship, I'd have to do them to English again, because there's no evidence of it. And we see that in particular where we're dealing with very, very high caliber apprentices who are resident in the UK but work at school in the UK. And again, I think that's something that a degree of flexibility around. It's only a very small point, but it's an important point in terms of, again, the whole issue of uptake.
So, I mean, the nuclear industry needs to go from about 75,000 skilled workers to about 150,000 if we're going to do everything we need to do around new nuclear defence. So we need to find ways to reduce the barriers to people coming into the sector. So there's a lot of work to do with young people to attract more people into engineering and STEM type degrees in general, not just nuclear. But we also need to think about how we help people transition at a later stage in their careers as well. So some of the higher level apprenticeships are really valuable in that context. So I think there is an important question about making sure people are rewarded appropriately in what is a very competitive skills environment, actually.
You're right. Look, the moving later in career is really, really important. We've seen the same in sort of high volume, high value manufacturing and in electrification. Batteries on its own should be 100 to 150,000 pounds, sorry, 150,000 person employment in the next 10 years, and they're not all going to come from schools. We can forget about that. 80% are going to come from other things, and so we made it up. Well, we called it a conversion apprenticeship because what a lot of employers wanted to do was put their people on a apprenticeship, a level 7 apprenticeship, for example. They were doing one job while learning another job. And it didn't really suit anybody. So we were working with employers and we said, well, why don't you put them in their new job in 4 to 6 months, will deliver training that will enable them to do that job while they're learning on the job. It's not legible because it's too small. But again, it's a way of flexing and using the term apprenticeship to mean what it really should mean.
I think you're right about reskilling is a huge element of what we do. We work with a number of employers, such as a bank that was shutting down branches, and we're actually, instead of making that staff redundant, reskilling them to data analytics in their head office. Or a insurance company that was shutting down a call center and reskilling them into, again, data analytics and software engineering in their head office. And actually, these are individuals who are, ages ranging from 25 to 70, reskilling into an apprenticeship into different sector. And actually, to keep going back on that level 2 functional skills point, it was a huge barrier. Some of these individuals have already done level 4, level 5, level 6, maybe 40 years ago, and had to resit English and maths. And actually, the biggest indicator of withdrawal at Multiverse, we do a lot of analytics internally to see what factors would make an apprentice withdraw, and whether or not an apprentice has to redo English and maths is the highest indicator of withdrawal. And actually, I think it's when you're looking at things that the Minister for Skills really cares about, which is QAR, apprentice retention, staying on program, these little unnecessary regulatory barriers actually have a much wider impact when it comes to careers for individuals.
Thank you very much. I'm really interested in what you said about the importance of people coming across from different sectors as well. My mum used to work in primary school until about 8 years ago, and now does railway construction as part of the Blue Cross around. So, love to see people, go from different places. Anybody teachers.
It's what we really have to work on.
But there's no reason why people can't. It's just the different barriers and things that stop them from being able to make that change. So I'm going to open up for a sort of discussion now. People sort of put hands up wherever indicate.
No, thank you. So I'm Duncan Baker, the MP for North Norfolk, and pushed quite hard in my constituency, which is a very rural one, for apprenticeships. I had a normal job before I came into this wacky place to actually employ people, which I wish more of our MPs did do that. And the business we ran was very passionate about giving young people opportunities, and so seeing that and actually going through the process, I was the finance director, and employing people in apprenticeships sort of inspired me to try and push that out more widely in my constituency. It amazes me that there are just so many employers that have not got a clue about what an apprenticeship is. And I think if we could somehow kind of quantify just how many businesses don't go out there and look to try and use what is effectively a tax break for the apprenticeship levy and go out and employ people, I think we really ought to shine a spotlight on that. Totally agree the pay is too low. In our business, we supplemented the basic apprenticeship levy because we were good people. Now, that isn't compulsory, but we looked at it and thought, well, people can't live off this wage, even if they're living at home. So I agree that it should be raised. But a couple of specific questions really is, when I launched my scheme to try and get more people to give apprenticeships, it was the same businesses that did it every single year. So I said, no, I'm not interested in you. You do it every year. I want to see the businesses that don't give apprenticeships every year. So actually, how good a job do we do in making, so that person that employs just, maybe who is a builder who employs 10 people has not got the time or the space to go around and think, do you know what, I'm going to start employing an apprenticeship. They don't know what the apprenticeship levy is. It's a fact, it's a pain. Who do I go to go and get the right person in? So we're not doing a good enough job about selling how good an apprenticeship is to give someone an opportunity. I would almost be a bit strict about this and say, if you employ 100 people in this country, you make it mandatory that you have to offer apprenticeships in your business, whether or not we can ever do this. And the last thing that I would say is that there's a real shortage of trainers out there. So if you're trying to get some apprenticeship in plumbing or become an electrician or a bricklayer, some of the courses in my part of the world, they only run twice a year, and there are so few trainers. If you want to become a bricklayer or whatever, you're waiting a year round before you get onto the training course to start your apprenticeship. Well, clearly you're not going to do it. You're going to go do something else. So that's a huge problem.
Thank you. Is that?
Oh, me, sorry, yes. I think this is probably principally addressed to Ben, but Doniya and Chris may have some thoughts as well. And it's because you raised the question of pre-apprenticeship preparation and what needs to happen at schools to increase the flow and the enthusiasm of young people for going into jobs. And I should say, I should declare an interest, which is that I'm a member of a Lords Committee on Education for 11 to 16-year-olds, and I'm extremely keen that we should contribute to thinking on this specific issue of improving the balance of skills versus knowledge that comes from the education system.
Well, I too am on this committee. It's 11 to 16, this Laws Committee, and so similar things really. So what recommendations would you have for schools to alter the way in which they behave and the encouragement they give? In the coalition government, I was in my GOES team, and I kept saying to him, if you really want to encourage apprenticeships, you have to get schools to be as enthusiastic about their apprentice leavers as they are about their university leavers. What a very good idea, said Sue, and did absolutely nothing about it. But I think this is the problem, that schools at the moment are measured on GCSEs, A-levels and university entries. So actually getting them to diversify into the, and most apprentices who've done their apprentices, they didn't hear about it from their schools, they heard about it from their mates, or they happened to be living. So we need to get the communication better. So what can we do better in schools to prepare young people for the sort of jobs which, you know, the exciting jobs which you're all.
It's a big, I don't know, it's a huge question. It's a real challenge. And you're right, part of it is about the equity that we place on apprenticeships. You know, it should be on an equal footing. It shouldn't matter what a young person from school goes on to. Success is success, isn't it? They go on to an apprenticeship, they go do their A-levels, they go to university, they get a job. All of those should be positive, you know, ticks in the box as far as our school's concerned. But you're right, the progression GCSE, A-level, university is all they care about. And again, I might be wrong, so don't quote me, but I'm not even entirely sure that a progression into an apprenticeship counts as a positive progression for a school. And so you can't blame them for not wanting to push it if it's not going to serve their requirements to present that data and to share that data. I mean, there are issues around, you know, misuse of vocational courses to hide people from GCSE statistics, but that's another matter. But I mean, even just adjusting the curriculum, I sat down with OCR and I said, why not in a GCSE physics exam when you're calculating watts, amps, and volts? Why can't we be talking about an electric car? Why can't we be talking about a nuclear submarine? Why are we always talking about, you know, Pierre and his 70 baguettes or whatever the example? You know, we're not even using real world examples when we examine, you know, people on these things. So it's no wonder that there isn't that level of engagement. Where we see real success is where, as we have done as a university, we've engaged with our FE colleges in the region, and we're supporting that, and they in turn are engaging with schools, and they're able to communicate and show what those progression pathways can look like for them. And so that at the moment, that's all we can do within the restrictions that we have. I think really, you know, it's time for a wholesale look at secondary school education. And I come back to it all the time. Why do 16-year-olds need to know how to get crude oil in 2023? And I mean, why do all 16-year-olds need to know how to get crude oil? Yeah, it's the same curriculum that we had 20, 30 years ago. Nothing's changed. And that's where we need to start.
Just a quick one on the point that you made about the university progression. Obviously, one of the things that a lot of schools do is to particularly highlight the students that, you know, get into Oxbridge or Group University and so on. Do you think that there needs to be maybe a similar thing within apprenticeships for, you know, which ones are, you know, the real kind of elite, I don't like the word elite, but a kind of almost like a benchmarking, so it's not just going into an apprenticeship, but it's, you know, that you have a really status one or something. Do you think that might shift schools' perception, or do you think it's just in terms of how it's measured in their overall stats?
For me, there's two components to that. There's the employer and there's the provider that employer chooses to work with. So you could have, a relatively unknown employer working with someone like University of Warwick, and is that considered, fantastic? Or you can have a really high profile employer working with one of these providers that's now been stripped of their funding. So there's real kind of challenges in and around what that looks like. But we should celebrate. We should put on a part. And if someone comes out of their A-levels and does a degree apprenticeship, it should be just as celebrated.
So I mean, this is just an anecdotal
Yeah.
example of one, but coming from darkest Surrey, I have been intrigued to see some schools starting to list, they've got so many Oxford offers, and they've also got so many apprenticeships. I think the issue is though that they tend to just want to focus on apprenticeships for Barclays or Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, it's the elite.
We're not talking about Surrey, of course.
I am talking about that, and I do apologise for that, but I think there's a really important point. I was going to say that I think it's really important to start. There are two routes here. One is the traditional route by universities, and we do want to attract more people into STEM and into engineering and so on, and that's a perfectly valid route. There should be an equally valid, equal opportunity, which is via a company through an apprenticeship and so on. And I think it's just really important to try and get that message out there, particularly if we want to broaden participation to bring more people into the sector overall. Actually, I was just going to come back quickly on the point around SMEs or how do you attract more companies into apprenticeships, raise awareness, because we've had exactly the same question asked of us with our work with supply chain development as part of the catapult. How do we know how many companies out there we're not reaching just because they don't know about us? And I think there's a really interesting question to be said around how you use the supply chain, government procurement, major procurement exercises, major infrastructure projects to drive that. And again, just an example of one, I believe I'm right in saying that Crossrail, when they were doing their procurement, they would write into their contracts a requirement for companies to take on a certain number of apprenticeships, in proportion to the value of the contract. So I think there are ways of doing that, and I think we can be much more muscular about that. And the government's got a stake in Sizewell C now. We're running a competition for SMRs. It's going to be really interesting to see the down selection criteria and how much emphasis we put on those SMR developers on reaching out and building the skills base, because it is in their collective interests to do so. And we just need somebody to make that happen.
Yeah, a couple of points there just coming up. So firstly, in terms of getting more awareness about apprenticeships in school, the recent skills bill did say, and there was a successful amendment that did say that there needed to be, I think, 6 points of contact with alternative, not non-university training within schools, which I think is really good, because then it brings out some of the different opportunities post-university, other than university, that you can go down. At Multiverse, we go to a lot of schools, we go to a lot of career fairs, we go to a lot of these type of events, and what we find really beneficial is when we have our former apprentices, current apprentices, go back to their schools and talk about their apprenticeship. Another sort of way that actually we've been really successful in the one application every 11 minutes is that we are on social media. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram. We do a lot of that stuff, particularly TikTok. We have a lot of organic marketing in the sense that we have a lot of apprentices say, this is my day in life as an apprentice, and they're sort of showing everything. And actually that brings a lot of young people on the journey, and showing that kind of videos and content to school people would be really good, because then they can see, people have a really good idea of what university looks like and what it feels like because of the media, and you see lots of programs about it, but not necessarily an apprenticeship. So I think it's always good to have that second voice in there. That being said, one of the problems that I think we're having is not that we have a lack of availability of young people wanting to do an apprenticeship. We have lots and lots and lots of young people wanting to do an apprenticeship. It's about the lack of availability of apprenticeships across the board, as we've discussed many times. And actually, it's that some organizations favor grad schemes over school leaver apprenticeship schemes. So it's, I often worry about encouraging apprenticeships to the extent where there's such a high demand but not enough supply. We need to be considerate of that as well. And actually, some of the innovative ways that we're talking about, including it in their opportunities to increase apprenticeships through government policy is really important. And lastly, the SME point is a huge one. And we did research, conducted a survey of SMEs on why they don't have apprentices. And a lot of SMEs have very high and positive feelings towards apprenticeships, but they find the system too complicated, or they're not sure about how they would go about because they're such a small company. So I think that there's lots of interesting work to be done when it comes to levy transfers, bringing more people on the journey of what that actually means, and also making it easier for SMEs to just reduce the barriers, reduce the unnecessary friction of when it comes to having apprentices.
Thank you. And I think that last point's a particularly important one. I know that speaking to a lot of the employers in my area, that actually they're very keen to do apprenticeships, but there isn't apprenticeship or the type of sector that they're in. So textiles manufacturing being a really obvious example, there is not a single apprenticeship that you can do in that. So you could want to take on apprentices, but there's not a scheme that they could go on. Any more questions? I know that you'd indicated, and we could start with you first.
At the Institute of the Motor Industry, we found through our research, basically you need to see it to be it. So our apprentices are coming through if they know somebody that's already in the sector, and with the reduction of exposure through careers engagement at schools, that is further diminishing opportunity for young people to see what the landscape looks like, what the opportunities are. We're now reducing the amount of places that young people can go to for no money. They're getting smaller and smaller, so they're getting more observed, less opportunities, and then it's a surprise that they don't suddenly think of something to go and investigate on their own. Outside of my role, I'm a parent to a 5-year-old and 7-year-old, and I'm incredibly frustrated that they go to a multi-faith school. I can't take them out of that school environment. I understand the reasons why, but they took them on a trip to see Father Christmas for a selection pack of chocolate that I can't put in their lunchbox. Yeah. So why not use that time to say, at this time of year, we produce a lot of chocolate. This is what a dairy farm looks like. This is what a factory looks like. Take that opportunity, do the trip. I recognise that they're important, but expand on it and make it useful for that exposure, and start the careers engagement at early years education, not when we're picking at GCSE.
Agree, not 100%. We are, well, schools are supposed to, according to Ofsted, have much greater input from industry. I've yet to see an Ofsted report that actually enforces that. So that's completely, it's a complete waste of time. My other problem is that we're British, and as being British, we're obsessed with the past, utterly obsessed with it. So yeah, my kids will go on a lovely, I live in Staffordshire, so they'll go on a nice visit to a mining museum, with skinny middle-aged white guys and rolly fags telling them about that is down pit, things like that. Will they ever go to an advanced manufacturing facility and have a look? No, they won't, because that's not on the curriculum, but dodgy coal mines are on the curriculum, and off they go. So I understand the pressures that schools are under. Their trips have this class and they have to do these tests, but you're right. It should be where the exposure happens, and it should be at a very, very young age. And the see it to be at heart is absolutely critical in everything that we're going to do. And I don't think we can rely on the goodwill to squeeze it in and around the busy curriculum anymore.
I'm just echoing several points. So on the lowest end crossing, we haven't procured all 3 major contracts, but we have procured one which are very small, which are both within Essex. And within that, we have considered the procurement framework that SMEs do have to include apprenticeships within their bid, which is absolutely great. But if individuals who are looking for apprenticeships aren't looking at that level, we do also have a list at the moment which allows people to register their interest in being offered the opportunity to have that apprenticeship, to have that graduate scheme. And we do have the marketing strategy as well. So all of our graduates, all of our apprenticeships have been produced or put together to produce a really great video that will go out on and then similar to your mom's experience, we have a mature apprenticeship. Her name is Emma, so she used to be a teacher. and she fell out of love with it, but it was only through her son's experience of researching what he wants to do after he left school that he realised that she could apply as well. I suppose drawing into that discussion and what can we do says people have to move within the industry into new roles, but if they're not already in that industry and they are potentially looking to move, how do they find out about apprenticeships that they could take up being not a school either, but actually looking to go elsewhere?
I think that's one of the things that we were trying to do about local apprenticeship fairs. We wanted to encourage young people to bring their parents, and it's not so that their parents can, you know, be there to push them into a certain apprenticeship over another or what have you. It's so that parents can be spoken to as well, because obviously they might be interested too. I know you had a question.
Yeah, just following up on the FE joint work with them, we're launching the Greater Manchester Institute of Technology tomorrow, which is a partnership between business FE colleges and working together to develop those courses. So business pipeline of talent, and then also the FE colleges can work with schools and more of that. And then the other point I just wanted to make is, I know the levy's been touched on a lot, and over the years it's something I think nobody likes, but nothing ever gets done around it. Everybody thinks something needs to happen to it, and nothing seems. So I'm just wondering what are the thoughts on widening that so businesses can use it to upskill current staff as well as the apprenticeships and all.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to
I've got
questions on those sort of questions and contributions?
Yeah, no, very, very happy to. I mean, I think there's one point which I think is really important, which is the role that training providers, and I include universities in that, training providers as well as companies like Multiverse, the role they have in helping employers define future skills, which employers might struggle to do. And some of the conversations I've heard about between companies and universities, where actually eyes have been opened, for example, it's not just mechanical engineering we're talking about, it's mechanical engineering plus data science or machine learning. It's how, you know, what does the modern world look like and what are the skills that are going to be needed 5 or 10 years time. So I think there's a really important role that providers have in doing that. And this isn't about universities, but they have a really good opportunity there to play that role because they can connect across multiple different disciplines. I would say though that there's a disproportionate regulatory risk there, because the sort of one announcement on the apprenticeship can have actually quite a disproportionate impact on a university that might be worried about its future income from overseas students, for example. So that does kind of up the stakes a bit, and they are important providers of apprenticeships, particularly the high value ones. The second point I was going to say is around the role of the employer here, because, you know, an SME trying to do it on their own is going to struggle. They're going to have to devote quite a lot of time for understanding how the system works. This isn't an apprenticeship, but the nuclear graduate scheme, for example, is an example of how you can have a single employer to take people on and then move them around different hosts across the nuclear sector. So they spend 6 months secondments over a 2-year period, and they develop skills in decommissioning, in fusion, in nuclear power, new power units or novel nuclear. And that I think is a really successful model. I think it applies in other sectors as well, in civil engineering, for example, where you can have a local organisation act as the employer and then is able to second apprentices out to SMEs in that particular region.
I think, yeah, definitely on the future skills points, I think training providers, we work a lot with businesses to help them understand what their skills gaps are and how apprenticeships can help fill those skills gaps. Actually, in terms of upskilling existing employees, people that already work there, we find that actually apprenticeships have been really successful because it gives individuals a portable qualification that they can then take their next job to say, I've actually got a level 4 data analytics qualification, rather than my company upskilled me in data analytics in a way that my company needs, if that makes sense. So it's actually quite transferable skills. In terms of the levy and reforming the levy, I know that this is a hot button topic, and it may not surprise you to hear an apprenticeship training provider say that they think the levy should be made more flexible. But I think that there is a risk in changing the levy to allow for different types of training that isn't regulated in a way that would be beneficial to the wider economy, particularly when it comes to what I just mentioned of lots of organizations have training that is only relevant or mainly relevant to their specific organization, of how things work there, how things are going to be functioning at that particular business. Whereas having a reformed course, whether that's the apprenticeship or a short course that contributes to an apprenticeship, will allow individuals, I think it gives individuals more autonomy to then have portable qualifications that will let them, you know, have more negotiating power in the labor market. And yeah, I think that, you know, introducing flexibility to the apprenticeship levy would have a risk that apprenticeships would fall. So I think that it would need to be managed in a way quite carefully and it's something I've been speaking to the Labour Party quite a lot about, is how to, you know, make sure that apprenticeships are protected while also understanding the needs of businesses.
And just,
Sorry.
sorry, following on this one, just very quickly, you know, the role of FE in all of this is utterly critical. They don't fully put on education for nothing, do they? And you know, 80 to 85% of the roles that we're looking at in the future are squarely within the FE bracket in terms of training provision. And it doesn't matter how many wonderful new standards we crank up, how we change the regulatory environment, we don't have the providers with the right skills in place at the right time. That's our biggest risk right now, is that we're not funding FE and paying them enough to retain the quality of staff that they need to do that. And I'm working at the moment with a big national call for employers to second people back into colleges to help plug the gap we've got in capability there. And really
Thank you. Just looking forward, as it's coming to the end of the meeting, and to help you as chair. The last time we met, about 2.5-3 months ago, we had a small business minister in Hollingwood to explain that. Now, since then, in that 2.5 months, we've now had the extent of unspent levy contributions. Again, PQs in the House of Lords. We now found out that it's 750 million, and the Sun have got it and all back. So I'm wondering, looking forward, what is it more that either you as members of Parliament of either House, or us as businessmen and women and employers, training providers, what is it more we need to do to say to people, look, money has been nicked by the taxman, you're not getting it back, why is it not doing it? It's that simple. Now, again, it's set the work of the committee, but it may be that it's been a while, I think, Sue, since we had a departmental education minister in front of us. Maybe it's time for whoever it is at that time to return. But
I think we have a constant concern that money simply goes back to the treasury. Our feeling always is that it's underspent money. It should go back into the system, back into apprenticeships. But it doesn't. It goes back into the treasury and gets lost.
Well, the answer we always get, though, is that it's actually helping to fund the apprenticeships that aren't funded by the levy.
Well, it is
for small businesses.
Yeah, but I don't think it is really.
Last year, 99.6% of the apprenticeship levy money was spent, not by businesses, but by DFE to fund apprenticeship incentivizations during COVID and also SMEs. So I think, I don't know whether last year or not was a blip, because in previous years it's been 77% approximately, but last year it was 99.6%. So I'm quite interested to see what it would be like at the end of this year to understand, you know, what the balance is, because it could be that what the AELP and other training provider organizations have been warning is that the money will run out because there is
Yes.
I think that's more
and probably more the problem in the coming years as apprenticeships do become more popular. But that's not to say that there shouldn't be a more transparent evaluation of how much money is being spent, where and why.
I am going to cut you off just because we've had 3 or 4 people now. So just in terms of closing, these are all of the points that we're taking away as parliamentarians and using every parliamentary lever we have. But from the business side, you know, please do be engaging with your business federations, you know, in the meetings that you're having with them, keep banging the drum. On a final sort of administrative note, we are on Twitter at Apprenticeships APPG, if anyone would like to tweet about the brilliant time we have the meeting, and to ask your MP why they weren't there, which is always a good one, and encourage them to come on to our future events. So thank you very much everyone for coming. We can sort of continue the discussion in the corridor, but we are being turned out by Fabians. So